couples with great sex lives talk about it all the time, like it's their favorite hobby, like it's their favorite shared musician, like it's their sports team that they're a fan of. They talk about it all the time because it matters.
Welcome to Sleeping Around, where we offer a peek behind the curtain of modern sex and relationship therapy and research, bringing you insights and conversations otherwise reserved for the therapy room. I'm your host, Elena Joy, a Master's of Counseling Psychology student, content creator, and lifelong sex and relationship nerd. Enjoy the episode. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Sleeping Around. I don't even know where to start introducing this guest because I'm so excited. Their name, Emily Nagoski, speaks for itself. You all know her. Emily Nagoski is the award-winning author of the New York Times best-selling book, Come As You Are and Come Together. They're also a co-author with their sister Amelia of a New York Times bestseller, Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. She earned an MS in counseling and a Ph.D. in health behavior. Now she combines sex education and stress education to teach folks to live with confidence and joy inside their bodies. If you listen to no other Sleeping Around episodes, listen to this one. We cover so many helpful and important topics and really get down into the nitty-gritty of how to have your best sex life. We go over 4 questions for self-discovery. We talk about the ingredients to a satisfying long-term sexual relationship. We talk about how to figure out what it is that you like. And we take it a step further in the Patreon extended cut, talking about how to orgasm with a partner. And we have an informative discussion around whether or not you can ruin sensation with vibrator overuse. Just overall, this conversation was a joy, a pleasure. Emily is a joy and a pleasure. And I'm thrilled and honored to be bringing this episode to you as the first one of 2025. Oh my God. So Happy New Year, and I hope you enjoy. Tell us a little bit about you. Tell us what got you into the sexual health research and writing.
Yeah, I have the nerdiest origin story in the world. When I started college, I was a big nerd and knew I would be going to grad school for something. I had no idea for what, but I knew I wanted to go to grad school, which meant I needed volunteer work on my resume, right? To look like a good grad school candidate. And a guy who lived on my floor was pre-med and said, hey, come be a peer health educator with me. And I was like, I like health. Why not? So I applied and I got accepted and I got trained to go into residence halls to talk about a lot of wellness topics, but also condoms, contraception, and consent.
Had that been an area that you were interested in already, or was that kind of your introduction to?
It's hard for me to know, because isn't everybody curious about, like, what's up with this sex thing? When you're 18 years old, everybody's sort of, like, interested. And it's different for 18-year-olds now because 18-year-olds now have the internet. And I did actually have the internet. The first time I ever saw the World Wide Web was when I got to college. But a strange thing happened. The day I arrived at college, I unpacked, I rode my bike to the library, I went to the sex section, and I pulled out the book with the largest spine, just like the fattest book. It was the Height Report on Women's Sexuality. And I sat in the library and I read this book. Now, nobody told me to do this. I just had this innate curiosity. So I was curious. Did I ever think I was going to do things about sexuality for a living? Not at all. My degree is in psychology with minors in cognitive science and philosophy. I thought I was going to be a clinical neuropsychologist. I love brain stuff. It shows up in my work all the time. But I wanted to work with people with traumatic brain injury and stroke. But man, that work I was doing, teaching about condoms, contraception, and consent. I added on to that sexual violence prevention education. And then I added on to that sexual violence crisis intervention. And doing all those aspects of the work made me like who I am as a person in a way that the intellectual brain academic nerd stuff just never could. I could see it changing people's lives in the moment. And that's why that's the path I chose.
So it sounds like where you've ended up is a blend of all those things, because you're impacting folks in real time. You are changing lives with your work. You are bringing education and pleasure and all of these pieces that you talked about and experienced in that educator role, and blending it with the neurobiology, the physiological pieces of sex as well.
Yeah, it's funny. All three of my degrees are in different fields. So my undergrad degree, like I said, is in basically cognitive science. My master's degree is in counseling psychology. I thought I might be a sex therapist. I realized pretty quickly that I don't have the magical thing that it takes to sit with people day after day and go, what was that like for you? Like, I don't have that thing. So I finished my degree in counseling psychology and went on to get a Ph.D. in public health, essentially. So I have these three different pieces of background that all combine in the way I approach my work.
I'm currently in a master's of counseling psychology, and as you're saying, I don't have that thing where I can go, what was that like? I'm like real time sitting here with you going, and what was that like?
And like you're in a classroom full of students and everyone in that class, while they're being taught, is responding to the instructor going, Yes. They're nodding. They're the most responsive students in the world.
It's a unique experience. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
The kind of cornerstone work, right? Come as you are. A big takeaway from that book was this idea of the dual control model of sexual response.
Yep.
What is that? Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, it's funny. This is an idea that I learned in my very first clinical internship during that master's degree. And I remember the day that I learned it. So here is the radical idea developed by Eric Janssen and John Bancroft at the Kinsey Institute. They started with this notion: what if the way sex works in our brain is the same way everything else works in every mammalian brain? Wild, right? So the way things work in our brains is in partnerships of excitatory and inhibitory impulses, hence dual control model. There's two parts to it. The first is the accelerator. This part of your brain notices everything in the environment that it decides is related to sex. Everything in your exteroceptive senses, everything you see, hear, smell, touch, taste, everything in your internal body sensations, and everything that you think, believe, or imagine that your brain codes as being related to sex, and it sends a turn-on signal that many of us are familiar with. At the same time, in parallel, you have brakes that are noticing all the good reasons not to be turned on right now. And again, it's everything you see, hear, smell, touch, or taste, all of your internal body sensations, and everything you think, believe, or imagine that your brain codes as a potential threat, and it sends a signal to turn off. So the arousal process is actually this dual process of turning on the ons, yes, but also turning off everything that's hitting the brakes, turning off the offs. And it turns out when people are struggling with any aspect of sexual response, sometimes it's because there's not enough stimulation to the accelerator. Like sometimes the quickest shortcut to orgasm is a vibrator, which is just enormously powerful stimulation to the accelerator. But more often when people are struggling, it's because there's too much stuff hitting the brakes. And one of the reasons that's the case is because of the huge variety of things that can hit the brakes that have nothing to do with sex. Body image, relationship issues, trauma history, cultural shame that we carry around from our childhood, messages about who we're supposed to be as a sexual person, and even just distractions in the moment, grit in the sheets, your to-do list clicking away, wondering whether or not you're meeting your partner's needs and expectations. All of those things can hit the brakes. And it turns out the most efficient and effective way to improve a person's sexual experience is to take notice of what's hitting the brakes and see what you can do to get rid of that stuff.
Huh. You almost hear mostly about just the accelerators, right?
Yeah,
and that
absolutely.
The accelerators should be enough. And what you're saying, or what the dual response model is saying, is that just accelerators may not be enough if there's also brakes.
It absolutely will not be enough if there's stuff hitting the brakes. And everybody has stuff hitting the brakes at least some of the time that is normal and healthy. Brakes are not a problem. Brakes are not a sign that there is something dysfunctional happening. It just means that your context is such that your sexual accelerator isn't freed up to do what it wants to do. And when I was growing up reading like women's magazines and stuff, it was all about add stimulation to the accelerator. Handcuffs and porn and lingerie and role play. And if you like those things, that's great. Go for it. But it turns out those things are not really going to help you if your problem is that you're stressed out, overwhelmed, exhausted, if you're feeling touched out because you have kids, if you're feeling unsupported and disconnected in your relationship, if when someone touches a part of your body, you have self-critical thoughts about that body part, those self-critical thoughts are going to hit the brake even as that touch activates the accelerator. And if the brakes are on, then you're not going to go anywhere.
Wow. So there's a lot of, it's complicated, right? There's so many different pieces of context that come into play. Can we talk a little bit about maybe some of the common ones in terms of brakes versus accelerators and how people can work to address those things?
Yeah, there are lots of ways to figure out like what activates your accelerator and what hits your brakes. One of the easiest ways is to think about, like, if you've had a good sexual experience ever in your life, like, what was the situation? Like, what were the aspects that were definitely activating your accelerator? Like, what were the partner characteristics, if a partner was involved, that were activating the accelerator? What was your own mental and physical health like in that moment? What was your relationship with your own body? What was the nature of your relationship with your partner if you were partnered? What was sort of like the kind of context or setting that you were in? Were you in person with that person? Was it over text? Was it over video? Was it in a place where it felt risky and like on the edge of public? Or was it a place where you could lock the door and be totally private and protected? Mm-hmm. So what was the setting? What were your other life circumstances? Like, how stressed out were you, broadly speaking, in your life? How worried were you about money and the state of the world and your family and your friends? And how much could you release all of the identities and roles that you're supposed to play in your life and just surrender to the pleasure of the moment? This last one is technically called ludic factors. Ludic has the same Latin root as the word ludicrous, and it just means to play. How free did you feel to play and romp with your partner, where there's nothing at stake? It's just a glorious, delightful game that you are there because everybody involved likes it.
I love that. The idea of looking back on a really positive experience and kind of breaking it down. It almost gives permission to let go of this idea that there's some inherent knowing about what good sex looks like, and that when you find somebody that you like, you're just going to know.
Oh, it all just happens automatically.
Exactly. And the memory that you have of a really good experience, it was a good experience because you guys just got each other, or whatever kind of theoretical, abstract thing.
Yeah.
And instead going, well, actually, I could probably break that experience down and figure out why it worked for me.
There probably were like subconscious or unconscious things going on, but when you go back and reflect on it, you can probably pull apart some elements to be like, the reason why this stands out to me as being a great sexual experience actually is because it seems to be these features. I recommend doing this actually with at least 3 different experiences, and then think about 3 experiences that were kind of like, let's not pull in the very bad experiences. We all know why the very bad experiences are the bad experiences they are. That's a topic for therapy also. But like, if you've had at least one like great sexual experience, maybe you've had at least one sexual experience where when you got done, you were like, well, that was some sex we had. What was the difference? Like, what was different about the context? What was different about your health and well-being, your relationship with your body, partner characteristics, your relationship with your partner, if there's a partner involved, the setting, and your worry about your other life circumstances, and again, those ludic factors, how free you felt to play.
One of the questions that I got from my audience, someone said that they found it much easier to explore and figure out what their brakes are than their accelerators.
Yeah.
And I think you're speaking to this and saying this is one way you can explore your accelerators is figure out what has felt really good in the past. But how about for someone who's thinking back and going, I don't know that I've had really great experiences, but I want to figure out what my accelerators are.
That's a really important question. And I do just want to say out loud that I have had both people saying it's really easy for me to figure out what my brakes are, but I can't figure out what my accelerators are. And I've had people say it's easier for me to figure out what my accelerators are, but I just can't understand. I just don't know what's hitting my brakes. So it is normal if one feels more difficult than the other, and it's normal regardless of which feels more difficult than the other. But if people are struggling to figure out what activates their accelerator, and it's because they've never had a sexual experience that was like really noticeably, memorably pleasurable, that's a person where I want them to start with themselves. And in particular, if they have either a trauma history, specifically a sexual trauma history, but kind of also any trauma, or if they were raised with sexual shame, maybe around like a particular religious upbringing, or just because they were raised in America, let's face it. If they have those in their background, I would like them to start with non-erotic, non-sexual pleasures.
Ooh, yeah.
So like I want a person who's working on finding out just what pleasure feels like in their body to think about other kinds of pleasure. Like, what does pleasure even feel like? What is a time when you have ever experienced any kind of pleasure ever? Like, what stands out in your memory as having been a pleasurable experience? Because that's going to help you figure out some broad outlines of the context where your brain can interpret a sensation as pleasurable. Because, like, I'm talking about pleasure like it's simple and easy, and it is not. My standard example is tickling. Tickling is some people's favorite, but tickling's not everybody's favorite. Some people really don't like it, but you can imagine hypothetically a context where you're already feeling really like aroused and connected with your certain special someone, and you're making out and playing and they tickle you, and like your brain could interpret that as feeling more connected and pleasurable and lead to other things. But if that same certain special someone tickles you when you're in the middle of an argument, that same sensation created by that same partner, your brain will interpret differently because the context is different. So for most people, the context that allows their brain to interpret any sensation as being pleasurable is one where they feel safe enough. And if it's going to be a sexual sensation, it's going to be explicitly sexual. There's going to be something about the context that is giving cues of like, hey, this is sexy, as opposed to the cues that are like, hey, this is childcare. Parents who have like got a toddler who's always climbing on them know that like when you transition into like you want it to be sexy, but your body's like, I spent my whole day getting touched by a toddler, and you're just there's more touching happening.
And then trying to separate out that, context.
So you have to learn how to transition into the kind of context that allows your brain to interpret a sensation as pleasurable. So in order to find out what activates your accelerator, first you have to figure out what kind of context lets your brain interpret something as sexy. I apologize if you can hear my cat meowing in the background.
I can, but I love it.
She's 18 years old.
Aww.
But before we get to the rest of the episode, I want to take a second to thank this week's sponsor, Helix Sleep. I've been sleeping on my Helix mattress now for 6 months at least. And when I tell you that this is the most comfortable mattress that I've ever had, I'm telling you that this is the most comfortable mattress that I've ever had. Helix Sleep is currently having a New Year's sale where from now until January 12th, you can get 25% off your mattress and 2 free pillows. All you have to do is go to helixsleep.com/ElenaJoy. It's linked in my description. You'll take their sleep quiz where they'll ask you about the type of sleeper you are, side sleeper, back sleeper, hot, cold, those kinds of things. And then they'll match you with the most appropriate mattress for your needs. I personally have their Helix Midnight Luxe mattress with the Glacio Tex cooling topper because I sleep hot. I love this mattress so much that when I found out that one of my friends was in need of a new mattress, we knew we had to go Helix. Not only is the mattress high quality, but they ship it right to your door. It just comes in a box. You open it up out of the plastic and it like self-expands. It's a super easy setup and my sleep has never been better. My partner and I are both side sleepers, and the combination of their cradling foam with the memory foam layers in this mattress takes pressure off my shoulder and back by keeping my spine aligned while I sleep. As you can probably hear from my voice, I'm a bit sick right now, and I think that part of this is because I've spent 2 weeks away from my Helix mattress. Over the holidays, I spent time at my parents' place, I spent time with my partner's family, and being away from this mattress impacted my sleep quality. And now I'm back home and I'm feeling the effects. So again, if you want to check out Helix Sleep for yourself, you can go to helixsleep.com/ElenaJoy and you can get 25% off your mattress plus 2 free pillows. And these are not crap little pillows. These are memory foam pillows. It's a great deal. You should check it out, especially if one of your New Year's resolutions is to take care of yourself. So thank you, Helix, for partnering with me on this video, and thanks for sending a mattress to my friend. It was very generous.
Okay, you were saying that the first kind of broad piece is to explore non-sexual context.
Right. Just so where you can experience pleasure.
Yes.
Which allows you to narrow it down to, okay, so I can experience pleasure when, for example, I feel safe enough. When I am with people where I don't feel judged, where I feel like I have permission to share pleasure with other people. For some people, pleasure from food, for example, is going to be easy. For some people, pleasure from food is going to be complicated because people can have a complicated relationship with food. For some people, pleasure of body sensations is going to be easy. And they'll be like, oh, right, body sensations can feel really pleasurable. And for some people, body sensations, they have a complicated relationship with them, or they have a hard time accessing body sensations. The term alexithymia translates not having language for words, but it's really about struggling to even notice and be aware of your internal experience. So whether this is going to be easy or difficult is going to vary a lot from person to person, but you start with what are the situations where I have been able to experience any kind of pleasure at all in my life. And you just dig deeper into what pleasure feels like. And when you have a sense of like how to create a context that lets your body experience pleasure, then start touching your own body. And again, begin in a non-sexy way. Like start with the periphery of your body, with the parts of your body as far away from your torso as you can get. Like touch your own fingers, touch your scalp, give yourself a scalp massage. It is one of the delights of life is to give yourself a scalp massage. Touch your own feet if you have feet that you can reach. We spend almost no time in non-judgmental noticing of the sensations of touching our own body. And we are capable of so many different kinds of sensation. This is one of my favorite things about the nervous system. The peripheral nervous system has all these different kinds of nerve endings so that you can feel light touch, which is just brushing over the surface, but you can also feel deep touch and pressure where you're moving around the tissue underneath the skin. You can feel the stretching of your tendons and ligaments and muscles deep inside your body. You can feel threat responses. So you can feel like buzzing sensations and you can feel sharp pinching sensations. There is no sensation you can experience that will feel pleasurable no matter the context. And there is no sensation you can experience that will feel painful no matter the context. Every sensation we experience depends on the context, and the starting point for creating a context is neutral, non-judgmental awareness of sensations.
So I'm hearing acceptance, I'm hearing self-compassion, I'm hearing an awareness, a presence.
Totally. Like, I hate to be another one of those people who's like, mindfulness is so good for you. But like, mindfulness is so good for you.
Yeah.
It's about practicing neutral, non-judgmental awareness of things that are happening to your body and in your body. And there's all kinds of reasons why it helps. But the first is, remember how I was saying that like if you're feeling stressed out or untrusting, that stuff hits the brakes. So you start with neutral non-judgment. So it's not hitting the accelerator, but it means the brakes are off.
Yeah. And the neutrality almost neutralizes some of the expectation of this must be pleasurable immediately, which brings me to a kind of another piece, which is responsive versus spontaneous desire. Does that fit within the dual response model?
Oh, heck yeah.
Okay.
For reasons that are probably like too nerdy to explain. But so the short version is that around the same time that I was in my master's program, the late 90s, early 2000s, there was this model being developed. Most of us grow up learning about sexual desire as being spontaneous. It sort of happens. It feels like out of the blue. You just kind of want it. Erica Moen, the cartoonist who illustrated Come As You Are, draws it as a lightning bolt to the genitals. Just kaboom. You just want it, right? And that absolutely is a normal, healthy way to experience desire. If you experience spontaneous desire, there is nothing wrong with you. You don't have to worry. It's not a dysfunction. But the reality is that it is not the only way to experience desire. The other one gets the name responsive desire because where spontaneous desire emerges in anticipation of pleasure, responsive desire emerges in response to pleasure. So this is the kind of desire that happens because date night's coming. And so you're like, all right, I'm going to get ready for this date. I'm going to turn on the right kind of music and I'm going to take a shower at the right temperature and I'm going to groom in all the ways that feel like I am getting my body ready for pleasurable sensations. And then like date night arrives and your partners arrive and you have a great conversation and your brain all this time is noticing all this like, we are creating a context where sexy times are going to happen. And by the time a partner touches you, your body's primed and like, oh, this is a good idea. We should do this. Yeah, that's responsive desire and it's also normal.
Okay, so responsive, even though it's in response to, it can also be in response to anticipation of.
It is actually a very, to me, fascinating intellectual question of like,
yeah.
Because what the researchers will actually tell you is that technically all desire is responsive desire. It's just spontaneous desire happens before we're aware of being turned on.
Okay.
And actually, when I wrote the revision of Come As You Are, which came out in 2021, I updated it. In the first version, in the desire chapter, and of course there's a desire chapter, the number one reason why couples seek sex therapy is desire differences, right? So, like, it was important, and especially because we got raised with the idea that spontaneous desire is kind of like the default, that's what we think of as heavy air quotes normal desire. People really want spontaneous desire, and they're like, okay, but suppose I have responsive desire, how do I fix it? And like, if you have responsive desire, you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. But in the first version of Come As You Are, I wanted to meet people where they were and be like, okay, understand that responsive desire is 100% normal. It's actually the same thing as spontaneous desire. It's actually just a different threshold. But if you want to create more spontaneous desire, here's how you do it. By the time I got to 2021, I was like, fuck that. Fuck spontaneous desire. Fuck desire as a goal. Desire is not the thing. Pleasure is the thing.
Oh, say more, please.
So let me tell you about Peggy Klein-Plotz, who is a sex therapist and researcher in Ottawa, Canada. She runs the Optimal Sexual Experiences Research Group. So suppose a couple goes to her and they, like all couples, many couples who seek sex therapy, the difficulty is that they have one partner wants sex more than the other one does. So Peggy will say to the lower desire partner, "So tell me about the sex you do not want." And do you think that they'd go on to describe sex that is pleasurable and joyful and fun and connected and vulnerable and authentic, with laughter and joy? Or is it, in Peggy's words, dismal and disappointing?
Oh, no.
And Peggy, being
Right.
Peggy, will say, "Well, you know, I rather like sex, but if that's the sex I were having, I wouldn't want it either." And when I was reading Peggy's research, as part of my revision of Come As You Are, I was like, yeah, it's not a dysfunction not to want sex you do not like. So as I was reading this research, I was reminded of some friends of mine who we were sitting at a bar. They've got 7 academic degrees between them and 2 children under the age of 5. And they're like, "So just out of curiosity, Emily, how do couples sustain a strong sexual connection over the long term?" And I was like, "So what you do?" I gave them the responsive desire answer, which is like, you set up a time, you put your bodies in the bed, you let your skin touch your partner's skin, and a lot of the times your body's gonna wake up and go, "Oh, right, I really like this. I really like this person. What a good idea this was." And as I'm saying, you let your skin touch your partner's skin, one of the partners facing me literally pushes away from the table and makes a disgusted face. And I was like, okay, so there's your problem. Your problem is not that you have low desire. Your problem is that you don't like the sex available to you in this relationship.
Right.
It's not dysfunctional not to want sex you do not like.
Ooh. Yeah, louder for the people in the back. Okay, so let's say we have listeners here who are hearing you say that and going, "Oh."
Yeah.
Oh. What's next?
Yeah. So fortunately, you have already asked, what do I do if I don't know what hits my accelerators? What if I don't even know what pleasure feels like in my body? Because people like you and me, we're telling people all the time, you have to talk to your partner, ask for what you want, tell your partner what you like. That's all well and good, but what if I don't know what I want? What if I don't even know what pleasure feels like? Which, not to stereotype, but most often that's going to be people who are raised in bodies where all the adults around them went, "It's a girl," and then they raised that person to be a girl, and that person grew up to identify, to feel comfortable psychologically and socially as a woman, because that person was taught from the day they were born that they have a moral obligation to be pretty, happy, calm, unfailingly generous, and attentive to the needs of others at all costs, even if it means sacrificing their own comfort and convenience. They were taught their pleasure very literally did not matter at all. What mattered was that their partner's needs were met. And so when they got into a sexual situation with somebody else, all of their attention, instead of being able to pay attention to the pleasurable sensations that are happening inside their body, all of their attention goes to monitoring, to making sure that they are meeting their partner's needs. So of course they don't know what pleasure feels like. They were taught their pleasure doesn't matter, and they were never granted an opportunity to experiment and feel what pleasure even feels like. So you start from scratch, find out what pleasure is.
The other was louder for the people in the back. This time, louder for Elena 10 years ago. Wow. Yeah. I think that what you just said is going to resonate pretty heavily with a lot of people, as I'm sure is unsurprising.
There's a heartbreaking piece to hearing you say that, though, because, like, it's 2024. I want us to be living in a world where Everybody's being raised to believe that their body belongs to them and they're entitled to the pleasure that their body is capable of feeling. Joni Blank, the founder of Good Vibrations, coined it. Pleasure is your birthright. And here we are in the year of our Lord 2024. And people still are waking up to the idea that their body belongs to them and they have a right to experience pleasure, even as far as the opposite that I have to say out loud to people, under no circumstances is unwanted pain ever normal. If sex hurts and you don't want it to hurt, that's a medical issue, or it might be simply that you are not turned on enough. Like you have not created a context where your brain's like, oh, there's a lot of stuff activating my accelerator and my brakes are freed up. Pain is never normal. If it's wanted pain if it's titty torture, if it's cock and ball torture and you're doing it on purpose, do you. And
big thumbs up for the listener at home.
100%.
We got a big thumbs up from Emily.
Right? If it's painful and you don't want it to hurt, pain is never normal. There's only two things that are never normal. One is unwanted pain and the other is lack of consent, obviously. Consent is everybody involved is glad to be there and free to leave with no unwanted consequences, including no unwanted emotional consequences like being made to feel guilty or selfish. Let's imagine a future where all of us only ever have the sex that we enjoy. And we don't even feel bad about not having the sex we don't like.
Yeah. It's like opening ourselves to the right to a yes and the right to a no, and to explore and discover those things individually, because each of us is going to have such different yeses and nos, and that all of it is okay, all of it is welcome, all of it is celebrated.
And you can expect it to change over the course of your life.
Yeah.
That what works for you now, probably going to be different from what works for you in 10 years.
So then going back to your couple friends, and then also this kind of ties into the topic of your new book in terms of creating lasting intimacy.
They were part of my inspiration. They got divorced.
So, okay, so you've got this kind of realization that it is normal to not want sex that you don't like.
Therefore, fuck desire.
Fuck desire, then what?
Yeah. So I know that we all have been raised to believe that like desire comes first. Desire is the most important thing. It turns out it's not. It turns out pleasure is the most important thing. When you put pleasure at the center of your definition of sexual well-being, desire will fall into place because it's fairly easy to want sex that you like. And it turns out the individuals who self-identify as having extraordinary sex, who have optimal, magnificent sex. The title of the book, by the way, by Peggy Kleinplatz is Magnificent Sex. They are people who prioritize sex. Sex matters to them. They feel it contributes something to their relationship and to their experience of being alive that is unique and therefore matters. It doesn't mean that in their relationships they never lose track of each other sexually. It means that because it matters, they're motivated to find their way back to each other. That also means that they talk about sex, like a lot. And I don't know about you, but I sort of got to adulthood thinking that if you have to talk about sex in a relationship and it doesn't just kind of happen, there must be something wrong. Turns out that's the opposite of true. Couples with great sex lives talk about it all the time, like it's their favorite hobby, like it's their favorite shared musician, like it's their sports team that they're a fan of. They talk about it all the time because it matters, because it's part of their connection. It's one of the things they share. Sometimes you get annoyed about your sports team, but if you're in like a longer term relationship, then you got to solve all kinds of problems together.
What I'm thinking about as you're saying all of this is this idea of centering pleasure over desire, and it's easier to want sex that you like. I feel like the intersection of those things is kind of this broader conversation around what constitutes sex, and letting go of some of the scripts in favor of a checking in with your own body and mind, and for each experience, like, what is it that I want today? What is it that would feel good now? What am I in the mood for? And allowing that flexibility of experience,
Right.
you know, even with the same person in a long-term relationship, that I can see opening the door or be another way to kind of think about how to, in a practical sense, how to center pleasure over desire.
Yes.
And how to have sex that you like.
Yeah. Is to keep paying attention to what feels good. So when you said, like, what is it that I want? It's actually when someone is new to this or if they're trying to solve a struggle they're experiencing, there are 4 questions I recommend you can ask yourself. I recommend thinking it through for yourself before you have a conversation about it with a partner. And maybe you want to have a conversation about it with a friend first or with a therapist. But the 4 questions are, what is it that I want when I want sex? A lot of people sort of joking first answer is orgasm. 95% of people can have an orgasm on their own. And if you are not among those people, there are whole books and courses just on that. It's a whole other topic. But so for most people, it's not orgasm. So it's what is it that I want when I want sex with this other person present? What matters? What is it that I don't want when I don't want sex? When you were talking about, like, so what even do we mean by sex? Yeah. When I think, I don't want to have sex right now. What is it that you don't want? Precisely. 3rd question, what is it that I like when I like sex? And then 4th question, obviously, what is it that I don't like when I don't like sex? These questions can take you so much farther than why don't we have sex more often?
Can you give some examples of what might be, other than orgasm, what might be some reasons that someone would think, oh, when I want sex, I want, or when I want sex with another person present, I want? What would be some other examples?
I've asked a few thousand people this question over the course of the last 15 years, mostly on the internet, just an open-ended question on a survey, let me know. And there are 4 really common answers. The number 1 answer is connection. I want to be present with a person in this really specific way. The number 2 thing people say they want is shared pleasure. I don't just want to rub my body up against some other human's body and feel how good it feels to touch my body against them. I want them to enjoy the sensation of my body against theirs. I want them to enjoy my pleasure, and I want to get to enjoy their pleasure. The mutuality of it really matters, the sharing specifically of pleasure. The 3rd thing, feeling and being wanted, of course, because so many of us are raised to believe that the erotic parts of ourselves are dirty, dangerous, and disgusting. So it makes sense that during sex is a time when we want those aspects of ourselves not merely to be acceptable and tolerable, but actively wanted and welcomed, desired. And then the 4th most common answer is a variable that I call freedom. But really what that means is the ability to surrender to pleasure, to allow pleasure to take up your whole consciousness so that you can stop worrying about your day-to-day life situations and just be immersed in this sensual experience. And there's lots of other things that people say too, but those are the 4 that rise to the top.
I think that will be helpful for anyone who is listening to this and is kind of like, oh, this all feels very new to me in terms of thinking about sex in this way.
I can also add that the number 1 most common thing people don't want when they don't want sex is feeling obligated. Like they have to force in order to meet someone else's needs or expectations. In fact, so there's a couple strong predictors of pain with sex, and one of them is feeling obligated.
Yeah.
Another one is sexual shame.
That touches into the rewrite or the next edition of Come As You Are, you said was in 2021. Since then, is there any new or exciting research that has come out that you've seen that you would like to share in the field of sexual health?
So one of the really exciting things that has happened, I was actually just talking to Kristen Marks, who's a professor, a researcher in Minnesota, and we were talking about how the field has shifted just in the last 5 to 10 years with this transition, recognizing the importance of responsive desire, that responsive desire is not really different from spontaneous desire. It's just about having a different threshold of awareness of desire, which means that pleasure, which has to precede the desire, is the foundational element. And so there's more and more research being done on how people experience pleasure, which is actually tied to how our brains experience pain, so that treating pain conditions is actually teaching us how to promote people's ability to access pleasure. Because it's all the same thing, it's just a different context.
And we're right back to the beginning, full circle moment.
It's just like getting like deeper and deeper into, there's this, because this is the thing all scientists will ultimately say, like, all these things are connected. But like, for realsy, they're all connected. When you hear about brain research that's like, sex lights up the same part of your brain that gets lit up by cocaine. It's like, because there's only one brain. And like this part of your brain that experiences pleasure is the part of your brain that experiences pleasure.
Yeah.
Like you don't have, it's not broken up into tiny pieces. Like the sex part is like right here. And like every other kind of pleasure is divided up. Pleasure is pleasure is pleasure. We've just been trained to feel ashamed of one particular experience of pleasure.
Especially when that particular experience of pleasure maybe overlaps with other forms of pleasure are less, socially normalized, right? In terms of in a sexual context.
We live in a world where I have had 18-year-old women tell me they feel guilty for sleeping. We can't even rest our bodies, meeting a basic biological need. We literally die without sleep. Sleep! How on earth are we supposed to feel like we have permission to experience pleasure?
Yeah, sleep, food, you mentioned earlier.
Right. Another thing, we literally die without it. Connection, love, affection, we literally die of loneliness. And yet we feel like, no, we need to be super independent and not inconvenience other people with our emotional needs. And I want to recognize that there are some big cultural barriers to people granting themselves permission. Like, there are 3 characteristics of couples who sustain a strong sexual connection over the long term. One is just that they're good friends. They admire and trust each other. And I know it sounds wacky, but it really matters that you like a person that you're going to have sex with on a regular basis. 2, they prioritize sex. They know it contributes something to their relationship. And this is only true if it does contribute something to their relationship. And so it matters to them that when their sexual connection gets more distant, which it will sometimes, it matters so they find their way back to each other. And then the 3rd characteristic, which is this thing we're talking about, is that they realize they have been following somebody else's rules for how they're supposed to live inside their body, how their partner is supposed to live inside their body, and how they're supposed to experience this sexual connection. And they decide to stop it. They decide to inquire deeply into what they want to get out of living inside this one and only body they get. Yeah. They want to really understand and explore what it's like for their partner to live inside their body. And they want to live through the process of exploring this sexual connection, whether it's just this one time or all of these times over all of these years that we explore and are delighted to watch the ways our bodies change.
I love everything you're sharing on this entire episode.
I get kind of like I hear myself saying it, I'm like, that sounds so good, Emily, but how? How are people going to do it? Because they're going to walk outside and the world is going to say to them, how dare you? How dare you not feel like you need to change? How dare you believe that the sexuality you have is a sexuality worth having?
What else can we do beyond having these conversations and putting it out so that hopefully more and more people come across them?
Yeah.
And then naming that while this all might sound really great, it's not simple and it's not easy.
I think one of the things that helps people, like centuries, we have been living with these cultural messages. It is ground into our ancestry. We're not the first generation that's confronting this, and the change is going to take generations. But I find that really motivating because I can find a lot of meaning in doing something if it's not just for me, like finding time to prioritize pleasure in your life means that you have to decide that there is something in your life that matters less to you than pleasure and get rid of it in order to create the time and energy that it takes to experience pleasure, to protect pleasure in your life. And that's a lot easier when I can say to myself, when I do that, I am making it easier for everyone around me to have permission to do the same thing in their lives. And I believe that everyone deserves permission to do that in their lives. And I'm making it easier for the next generation of people. My niece is going to grow up in a world that is not quite as shaming of basic bodily needs. And also, by the way, the pleasure that is her birthright.
It's like connecting it to a larger meaning.
Yes.
Like adding this kind of purpose might open that door a crack further for somebody to step into this type of exploration.
Women in particular, things that women struggle to do for themselves, they feel motivated like, but I can do it if it means I'm doing good for other people.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. There's also a way we can frame this, whether it's rest, whether it's pleasure, whether it's food or sleep or any of these things, framing it as an act of resistance.
Yes.
Because it is.
Absolutely.
Because even if you are by yourself and nobody is watching, you making those choices, like you just said, Emily, we are shaping the people around us. We are shaping the next generation. And we are resisting.
Yes.
We're resisting these cultural norms, capitalism, whole other thing.
And yet it's the same thing. I'm going to drop a name. This is probably a thing you're familiar with, but I want everyone who's listening to this to look up the Nap Bishop, Trisha Hersey, and her book, Rest is Resistance. One of the things I love about Trisha Hersey's language, she talks about it as an unraveling from white supremacy and late capitalism.
Colonization.
And that language, that image of unraveling from it, like recognizing that it's going to take time and it's not always going to be comfortable or easy, and you are setting yourself free.
I think that is a beautiful place for us to end this main part of the episode. Before we hop into the Patreon exclusive, is there anything that you want to promote or places that people can find you if they want to hear more?
If you go to emilynagoski.com, you can sign up for my newsletter. It is a couple of times a month. Mostly I just answer people's sex questions.
Okay, that'll be linked in the description. It'll be linked in the show notes along with your books. Because duh. Thank you so much for joining me.
I love talking about this stuff. Thank you so much.
And one more thank you to Helix Sleep for partnering with me on this video. Remember that you can go to helixsleep.com/ElenaJoy and get 25% off your mattress and 2 free pillows as a part of their New Year's sale. Thanks for listening. You can also access all of our extended cut episodes with bonus content from every single guest over on Patreon at patreon.com/ElenaJoy. That's patreon.com/ALAYNAJoy. And be sure to follow us on Instagram at SleepingAroundPod for updates, teasers, episode discussions, and more. This episode was produced by Elena Joy and Danae Fender and edited by Corey Mosqueda. See you next time, back here on the couch.